This is Ben from Testiv, and we're looking at an ACT science question. Now this science question says to refer to figure 1, which illustrates the concentration of substances on either side of a lipid membrane separating two aqueous compartments. So if we look at figure 1, we can see we have two aqueous compartments, we have a membrane in the middle, and we have these two substances, propanol and glycerol. And propanol has a higher concentration than glycerol on the right side here after crossing the membrane, as it's going to tell us in the question. It says, which of the following statements may explain why propanol has a higher concentration than glycerol across the cell membrane? So when I see this word may, what that tells me is I'm not going to have an answer that for sure is a detailed explanation for exactly why it's higher, but I'm going to have to do a little bit of reasoning or a little bit of inference. So let's look at our answer choices. Looks like they basically all revolve around this one idea. Propanol is lipid insoluble, or glycerol is lipid soluble. So propanol is lipid insoluble and therefore does not dissolve as it passes through the membrane. Glycerol is lipid soluble and therefore dissolves as it passes through the membrane. So we can see that these are basically different versions of the same type of answer. So let's see if we have any information about this in our passage. We have a little bit of information about lipid-soluble substances right here. It says lipid-soluble substances can pass through the membrane by dissolving in the membrane lipids. So I'm trying to give a picture to myself, and I'm trying to visualize what this means. It means that as the substance that is lipid-soluble passes through the membrane, the way that it passes through is by dissolving into that membrane. Okay, well, if I do a little bit of reasoning there, well, I can definitely see that it says glycerol is lipid soluble and therefore dissolves as it passes through the membrane. That's internally consistent, and it's consistent with what a lipid soluble substance would do based on the passage. Now, the next thing that we have to ask is, would that mean that its concentration is lower than the propanol? Well, the first answer choice says that propanol is lipid insoluble, so it's the opposite, and therefore does not dissolve. Well, it follows that if lipid-soluble substances, if that by definition means they dissolve in the lipid membrane, and then it would mean that lipid-insoluble substances do not. So in my mind, both of these kind of have to go together. If F is true, and that's really what we have to choose. We can choose F, we can choose G, or we can choose both or neither. Well, it would be kind of safe to choose G because we have that information in the passage, but we also have, it also follows that if G is true, then F is probably true, and it follows that if propanol, we're being asked what may explain it. So if propanol didn't dissolve in the membrane, it follows that it would still have a higher concentration once it passes through. And likewise, if glycerol does dissolve in the membrane, it follows that it would have a lower concentration when it passes through. So I'm going to choose that both are true.